Great storytelling, Arto. Nice to dive into the annals of Smartly history. I'm really glad that we're starting to use hooks. I actually have a fondness for hooks because before I moved to Helsinki, I lived in Austin, Texas, and the University of Austin, their mascot is the longhorn cow, and our motto is hook 'em. So come on, Smartly, let's hook 'em. Well, now is the time where we gather on our comfy chairs here in the studio or wherever you are, Nils, for our panel discussion on composable and extendable UI patterns and components. Joining our fantastic guest speakers, Nils and Varya, is Rami from Smartly.io's design system-focused team, Duplo, and also a former colleague that I learned tonight of Arto and Varya. So you guys are having like a little family reunion here at DevTalks. Nice that Smartly brings people together. So let's get started. Now tell me, Rami, why is your team called Duplo?
That's an interesting story. In Smartly, there is a custom that every team and their members can choose like the name. And it's usually a voting process. And of course, like when thinking about design system team, what that Duplo is, so then we were thinking naturally something reusable, something that you can build fancy stuff. And of course, like quite fast, like there was an idea that, okay, like Lego blocks. You can build a lot of amazing stuff. They are kind of modular. You can stack them together and whatnot. But then Lego is unfortunately a reserved word at Smartly. So there was actually a slide in Arto's presentation with the dog. That's a like employer of Smartly, and that dog's name is Lego. So then we couldn't take it. So then what is a bit bigger than Lego is of course Duplo blocks, like the one bigger one. And of course the good side with Duplos is that they are also appropriate for like people under 3 years old. So there's a kind of good side to it too. So.
Are you saying we developers are young people? We can't play with Legos. We can only play with big blocks.
I mean, young by heart, right? So.
Okay, I'll take that. Well, that's a clever story, and Lego is our company mascot, so can't take his name. He's an adorable office dog. Well, getting into our panel here, remember that you can ask your questions in the chat bar, and we will be moderating those questions and then asking them after this panel. We have a 10-minute discussion, so please ask your questions. But starting off with our first question to Varya, how has the design system helped you or slowed you down at work?
That's a tricky question. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Basically, as a design system expert, of course, I say that design system always help. That's just a joke. Sure, you have to decide where you invest your resources, rather to long-term stability or to fast delivering the things. So for large projects, I would say large, long-lasting projects, definitely go with design system. For something fast and that needs to be launched soon and maybe after that be forgotten forever, then probably no.
Nils, what's your opinion?
Well, since I'm working in an agency and I'm working on many different products, I've had experiences with design systems that were really good, where everything was, when you come new to a project, everything was really nice to work with, and you had like well-documented systems where you could easily contribute to. But I also had like not very well documented systems where it was most of the time I was like searching for is this component already there? What does this component do? How does it work in this context? Do I need something new? And this was then a little bit harder. And I also had the experience of developing a design system just to have a design system and not to, it wasn't, in my opinion at least, it was not needed at that point, and a lot of time and also money went into building the design system where it didn't give any help in the end.
I would agree. We don't want to build a design system just to build it, but it is difficult to know when is the right time, because as we saw in Arto's storytelling, we went through some very different ages at Smartly, and I think some teams now are experiencing some growing pains as we're trying to adopt the design system and transfer over our custom components. So I kind of think that segues into the next question. When do you start thinking about design systems as a small company, and taking into account like the scalability and having the dedicated team for that work? Like, you don't want to build it just to build it. So when is that right, time in a company's, life? What would you say, Nils?
I would say that you should, as long as let's say you are kind of a startup or whatever, and you're building an MVP, just to make sure if your idea works, if whatever you're building works. At the first point, I think you maybe most of the time don't need a design system, but as soon as you know that whatever you're building is working, then you should at least think about, okay, is a design system necessary here? And you should ask this question over and over again, because there's a lot of stuff. If you build it up front, it makes things in the future much easier. Like, think about, okay, we know that our idea is working. Will we expand to other countries? Do we need to have a multi-language thing? Do we need to have implementations like right-to-left languages, so we can implement this in the development and the design system up front? So I think starting early and really thinking about where will we go in the future, where might we go in the future, is really an important question once you know that whatever you're building is working. And of course, if you're just working on let's say, a conference page where you know that the whole conference will be rebranded next year, then you probably don't need a design system. You can just build whatever you want.
Yeah, I don't want to waste all your effort on something that's going to be trashed next year. Varya, from your talk, you had a lot of experience. You talked about your last projects, of the processes and getting a design system out. So, building kind of on what Nils has just shared, when do you think that is, the right time to bring the design system to a company? Like, looking at all the work that's involved and like rolling out a design system, all those matrices and different things. Could a startup do that, or is that really needing a dedicated team?
I personally never had experience that design system was started too early. So I've been involved to many projects, but it was always, I would say, not exactly too late, but it could have been earlier.
I can truly second that one. I mean, I think like the smart story that Arto was sharing. So I mean that I kind of tend to agree with Nils that that if you are really like a startup and you are kind of like really pushing that stuff out, so you need to have the prototype done and whatnot. So then maybe there are some ready-made libraries that you can kind of take use. And of course, like design system has many shapes and forms. So I like in that case, you still might want to choose something ready-made and then kind of ship it fast. But I mean, when you have like evolved a bit as a company, and you have like multiple teams working on something. So I kind of then agree totally with Varya that I also haven't joined any company that would have started it like like too early, I would say. But then maybe startup is the like really like small niche thing that kind of you would then actually start it too early and just burning those business angel dollars just to make the system that then is kind of trashed. So I mean that's kind of I guess the point. So.
Yeah, but anyway, speaking about startup, we can recollect that when we say design system, there is no certain definition. So maybe we still can start from very beginning, but with something very, very small, say a list of tokens, and that will be already systematic approach. So in some words, it will be design system.
Yeah, I guess like then the whole beauty of the whole idea is that you could start like, I guess about design maturity too. So then if you have those design tokens utilized in the design side already, so of course you could like, it doesn't need to be a full-blown thing that is like from design to the pattern library, like covering everything, but kind of really starting something small. So then of course it's about branding too.
Yeah, I think Nils wants.
Yes,
Yes.
He's waving at us. We're hybrid here. At Smartly, we've been learning this. How do we work with people remote and people in an office now that there's this pandemic? So great to practice with you, Nils. We have no audio. The audio for Nils is gone. This is exactly what we experience in hybrid mode.
Yeah, it's like that. Am I muted? Am I double muted?
Yeah, we're always saying check.
Unmuting really helps. Yes. So sound should be here now. From what you said, I think a lot of people are maybe frightened by or they get scared when they hear the word design system. And this is maybe why they say we don't need a design system or we don't want to have one. But of course, like you said, now if you just have like some design tokens and you said, okay, these are the colors, this is our corporate identity, this could be the fundamentals and the start of a design system. So, and maybe you're just afraid of calling it a design system because you always think you need something like the material design stuff where everything is already done already. You have all the components, but it doesn't have to be like that. You can start very, very simple and still call it your basic design system, I guess.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I guess like, well, my mantra is that kind of design drives this work. So if it starts from there, even if the code part is not super unified, you don't have a component library, still probably if you are using those tokens from the design. So although I guess like Nils, your talk was more like you had this nice picture and then the outcome wasn't exactly that, but at least the colors were pretty okay, I guess, in the image. So I mean, it was still black and white.
Yeah, but this brings up an interesting point. You know, like if you're a small company and you don't have a lot of resources, like why not just get stuff from the internet, you know, where it's free? Why should they build their own design system? What do you think, Rami?
Yeah, that's a really valid point too. I mean that if you have like your tokens available and something small started, of course, like then you are probably lucrative to look like, I guess like Nils was already talking about material, but there is like bootstraps and kind of the component library is nothing new and those have been there for ages. And of course, like they provide you nice like reusability to some extent at least and kind of certain set of components. But then when thinking a bit further, I guess like when you are like doing some admin view, for instance, so then maybe the brand identity of your company is not that important. So maybe it's fine that it looks like Bootstrap or it feels like material. But then when you become larger and kind of your kind of product identity grows and kind of you need to be more brand aware, then I think still that you need to have something on your own. So then your kind of motion with your components, if you're using material, then it's kind of feels material mostly. So of course you can like theme it and whatnot, but it's still kind of layer on top of it, not that it's kind of on your own fully. So I guess like then when you are really like larger company doing really like the kind of customer facing product part, so then I guess in my feeling is that in that case kind of at least kind of building on top of something existing makes a lot of sense versus then like just using fully something that is there on the internet for free kind of, or is it then for free? I don't know. Maybe not in the end.
I think free tends to look free. Like people look at your site and go like, oh, that looks like, you know, Bootstrap. That looks like it was built in Bootstrap. It doesn't look professional, I would say.
Yeah, but there are some libraries that are completely white label, so you can style them as you want, and it wouldn't feel and look like material. But still, here there is this resource management aspect. So even if you don't write the code, you still have to manage it or study its architecture and so on and so on. Say you know it already, it's one situation, but if you start from scratch, sometimes it's just easier to write your own.
Yeah, I think that's a good cost analysis for a company then, like how much time does it take to learn the documentation for one of these, reusable libraries versus, building our own from scratch. And, in some cases there might be some benefit to using your own, and others, you can go a while with using some of these libraries out there, but white labeling them, like you said.
Yeah. Let's ask what Nils thinks. I think he has to share something.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that if you don't have that many resources available, I've experienced that some people just want to build their design system because they are kind of only thinking about visual stuff and brand identity. But then you also have to develop this, and you have to make things accessible and performant. And I would always, if you don't have that many resources, better say search for something that is pre-built but accessible, and take this as a foundation instead of just going on styling and brand identity and forgetting about performance, accessibility, and all of this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember the accessibility part. I actually, before I became a software developer, worked at a nonprofit for people with disabilities. And so accessibility is something that I really care about and have, done some research into. And I'm really excited that at Smartly we've been moving a lot of our components to be accessible, and partly, from our own desire to be inclusive, but also because a lot of the corporate, entities require you to, be WCAG compliant, to different levels. So I think that is something that companies should think about from the beginning when they're starting to develop, that they are looking at those guides and being compliant, because if you have to switch your stuff over after you've built out a lot of functionality, it's a little painful.
Yeah, but I think like Nils has a really good point there, that kind of we've been now putting an effort into that one, but it's not super easy to actually do. So I mean that if you have something like you are really short on time and you have a ready-made component, so I mean then of course you could take that kind of thing for free, kind of then from the internet, I guess, and again like free. So.
All right. Well, I think as we go on to talking about this cost analysis, there was a really good question about the, technical extendability versus design extendability. So, Nils, when you think about like technical limitation and design flexibility, how restrictive should these be, and how do you build things to be extendable, in technical and design?
That really is, I think, a hard question. And I guess it comes down, like in my talk, it comes down to a lot of communication, and you have to talk to each other, because you have to know what you're building, if this is technically possible. And then, like we heard in the talk before, it really also depends on how your design system works. Is it very rigid or is it more flexible? If it is more flexible, then as a designer, you maybe care a lot about more of transporting a message and giving this message to the people. If you have landing pages, product pages, something like this. And then you're much more flexible, and somehow the development team has to work with this as well. So again, there's a lot of communication needed. If you don't have this level of communication, then maybe you need a very rigid and strict design system where you really start like, these are my components, and my components in my design tool are one-to-one the components that are used by the development team. And when I only use these components, then it will be easy to develop. If I need something else, then there needs to be a suggestion for it. Some people say, okay, we need this new component and this needs to be developed. And then you go from design to development to implementation, and then we can use this one as well. But I'd much more prefer if you have like this approach where you have a lot more communication in between the fields, like between design, development, product, and so on.
Yeah, it should be an iterative process. And I think today we learned a lot of tips about how to handle the process and the communication. And this is something you've actually done some studies and research in your master's thesis at Aalto into like the extendability, of the design and technical feasibility.
Yes, I actually asked 20 people, 10 designers and 10 developers, and they covered this question too about how strict the design system should be and what are the benefits on this and that approach. This is related to what Arto was talking about. Yeah, and many say that with the strict design system, you can move on fast as a design system team, but you probably would experience some problems in design system adoption, especially if it's a large company and there is a variety of interfaces in different products. On the other hand, you can be very flexible, and this should increase adoption level very, very much, but it's much more work for design system team.
Speaking of work for the design system team, Mr. Duplo,
Yes?
how has it been with designing the Smartly UI and thinking about this design extendability? And I know we're constantly pinging you guys saying like, we need to add more props to this, and we need to change the API and the interfaces. So what are some of the decisions you all have made to try and make components more extendable?
Yeah, I think like it boils down to like first topic is then kind of that the design and development side, they should have like similar constraints. I mean, I guess we were in the beginning facing that kind of, usually in the design tools you have a lot of freedom, but then kind of understanding from the kind of, when you actually, let's say like Figma component, you take an example. So you have a Figma component and you are design with, and then you can do a lot with it, or then you can just break it out from the rules kind of, or then the rules are not that like thorough, so then you kind of do like component in design that think that, okay, this is a component that actually developers can also use. And then you are kind of, anyways, at some point you are doing some kind of handover unless we have this people who can do from the database to the design part, or then the other way around, like from the
unicorn.
Yeah, exactly, like from service design then to the database.
Yeah.
Anyways, the handover will happen, and then at that stage it's kind of like, well, it's a design system component, so I can just take it and use it. But then you realize that, the flexibility of the design part is actually more than the kind of flexibility in the component part. So it's kind of crucial that the flexibility is the same, or then that you have like clearly in the handover defining that, okay, this is now kind of something new. This is not in the system. I'd not had kind of just checking the visuals like, well, this looks like a select box or something like that, versus then like it's actually not. And there is like this and these things that the designer was thinking like internally, and the component that is in the kind of pattern library doesn't support this at all. So then you kind of may end up in a situation where you have these outside of the system components, like, and they can be totally invisible. Like you have like, well, there was no component in the system, so then I just decided that well, I just build it on my own, and then kind of this is invisible work, and kind of I would say with even a technical depth or like not understanding. And of course, it's fine. There is like teams that they have specific problems that they need to solve, and that's totally fine. I mean, there are no like existing solutions in any of the systems that there are, and of course, like just pushing the envelope further and then making that happen. That's natural evolution. But then understanding that okay, this is the component I'm extending, and kind of this is the part that might go into the system. If we don't know that, then then it's always outside of the system, and then it's kind of really hard to kind of grasp. So,
yeah. And Nils, working for an agency, how do you consider like the extendability of design systems? Do your clients want design systems, or are they not wanting to spend money on that? Like, how do you pitch a design system and think about how that company will be owning it, and how are you going to build the interfaces?
Well, what we now always try to do for example, mostly in the design team, we have like a phase where when we really start some new product from scratch, then there is a point where you simply use your design tool and use whatever colors come to mind and think about and really do some creative stuff. But then we always do at one point say, okay, now we have to be a lot more stricter here and define the colors, name the colors, and we have a lot of developers working here. We're much more developers than designers, and they always kind of educate us on we need to name things. It's much easier if you upfront name your, I was talking about Figma, this is what we're using as well. If you name your symbols and you come up with names so that everyone in the team, like the developers and the designers, are talking about the same. If you say this is advertising cards component, things like this. So everybody is speaking about the same thing, and then you can build tickets and so on. So even if we are not, if the task is not to build a design system, we always try to implement this in our design tool and restrict ourselves to specific font sizes, colors, gaps in between stuff, so that it's much easier to translate this to code and not just do fancy design stuff, whatever.
Yeah, I agree that naming things is super important. There's a great quote in software development that the two hardest things is naming things and cache invalidation.
And the cache invalidation is not that difficult, right? So.
No, it's very hard. That's why naming is so hard. No, it's very hard. Thank you, Nils. Yeah, it's good to have the designers and the developers working together, and hopefully we have good communication tools so that we're on the same page. Like we need a map. So tomorrow, like build me a map.
Map.
Yeah, component status map, please, with a matrix. Really cool colors.
Yeah.
I like colors.
Look nice.
Maybe brand colors.
Oh.
Be nice. Yeah. All right. Thank you all for our panel. We're going to move on to the community questions. So I believe we have some questions coming in from the chat. Here's a good one. I'll just throw it up, toss it up, and see who wants to answer. How to take a design system over into the silos in a big company. Does anyone have experience with that?
Yeah. Not only me. Rami too.
Yeah. Because you guys were at the same company.
One by one we were involved in the same project once. And that was exactly the task, like to speak around the design system.
So how did you take that into like those silos?
I can share my experience, but after that, I guess Rami.
I guess you started there, so you can also start.
To say. So basically, probably it would be better not to share about particular project, but in general. So I really think that it's worth talking to people, and I would like to warn everyone that just one-time talking doesn't work. So it has to be again and again and again, and through time you get the some results. So there should be some not one-time actions, but some systematic actions, like say regular onboarding meetings that I shared, or regular design system in company meetups. So something regular that happens again and again and again, and then you there is more word of mouth about design system in the company, and then there is kind of entering point for those who got mature enough to address their questions, at least questions, to the design system. So that's basically my experience.
That's good. Yeah, I think we have our design office hours, design system office hours every Wednesday. So maybe that's a practice that you brought over from this unnamed company.
Yeah, well, of course, that's kind of one, or of course, it's practice probably used by many, but I guess what it boils down to is that you have some kind of sponsor, whatever that is. I mean, of course, on the level that you're working on, so that kind of trust in that and kind of makes the funding for you. So I mean, of course, then selling that first bit is probably then the most difficult part. So of course you can build your own teeny tiny thing somewhere on the niche and then hope for it to grow, but probably hope doesn't manage it. So I mean, you need to do a lot of selling and then accepting a lot of no's and then selling some more. I guess it's design is art of selling that stuff. So I mean, maybe design system usage is even more on that side. So if you don't have that sponsor on the level that you're working on, is it then on the design level, which will probably is better? Again, the mantra that I'm repeating, that design drives this work. So then, I mean, if you have the this kind of head of design level, power sponsor for you, then that's kind of good start. Of course, then you have a starting, you can also start them from the tech level. So then, of course, kind of power sponsor from that side, that you're kind of covered with that sense. So I guess that's important. And if you don't have it, I have also experience in kind of failing in that sense, not that smartly, luckily. So there's power sponsors are enough, and that's great. But and also then I guess our mutual example is something that is kind of the power sponsor was there, but then an example where kind of trying to push without the support, and then that's hard. Then you're kind of pushing with the rope, and it's not going anywhere. Or then you kind of silo your system too small that actually, because it still needs scale. So I mean that to get actually the benefit. So then you are lost in that kind of. So then
Yeah, it's good to have the sponsorship to bring it into those different silos, because you need that communication across the different stakeholders.
To sum up, we can say that if we treat design system as a real product, we need an investment plan and we need to present it to the business levels. And once we got approval, we have resources, including the resources for popularizing the design system inside the company.
Yeah, of course, there are examples where this kind of guerrilla approach has also worked, but then it's, I guess, still at some point the kind of selling needs to happen, and then I totally agree that it's a product, so it needs to have a kind of investment plan, what the value is that it brings, so also thinking about what are we actually doing here, and of course then this kind of basic backlog management and whatnot, so kind of that is actually thought as a product, so there is a team doing it, and then there is a kind of stuff that team is doing. So.
Yeah. There is a question for Nils. On the topic of design development merging together, what's your take on low-code, no-code tools such as Webflow or Flutterflow?
I only know Webflow, and I really think these are great tools. I've seen designers who did not know any code stuff learn a lot more about how CSS works, for example, and you already also have this in Figma. Like if you use the auto layout tool, you learn a lot about how CSS Flexbox works, and you also have that in Webflow. You see that you have to build things responsively, and you learn the difference between a percentage-based width and pixel-based width. So there's a lot about how CSS works that you can learn when using these tools. And I also was surprised at how good the actual code quality was. I mean, there, of course, you can do improvements, and it's not like the best code ever, but it is better than I expected. I mean, I come from a time when I did my first websites in Dreamweaver, and then we abandoned all of this, and now this comes back in much better quality than it was before. So I can really recommend using these tools, especially when you are a designer and want to understand a bit more about how all of this HTML, CSS stuff works.
Yeah, I guess like then the part that it might be not that beneficial if you're actually doing something like a real complicated, super complicated and performant product with large sums of data, I guess. So I mean, I would even use it for some simple applications even. I mean, I also checked a few, and haven't like professionally used them, but tried them out, of course, because it's kind of super interesting part. And they seem to be actually doing really good job. So I mean, there are like accessibility is in place in many of those, and then you can still build those kind of simple things. But then kind of with the more complex stuff, I guess then it's just too complex still to handle. I mean, and emphasize on still. So let's see.
So you've checked out these tools, but what about a design system, like some of the design systems out there? What would you consider as a great example? Anyone want to go first?
That's an interesting question. Like, what is then? I guess like what Arta was talking about, the kind of pendulum. So, I don't know greatness of a design system. So, how do you define it? I guess you would need to ask from the users of that system, like how good they are. But of course, there are like really good references, and like Spotify's Polaris, I guess, is at least like what I'm usually checking for reference. It has like really good documentation and whatnot. So at least like and then kind of quite comprehensive. And of course, like then we have plethora of those proprietary systems that we know nothing about that are probably great.
I mean, ours is amazing, but you won't know anything about it.
Well, you saw at least the name, right? So the kind of technical component library names.
Yes. But you had some examples in your talk, Varya. Was there any that you've come across in some of your research that you think had really good layout, or the process of the design system?
Well, good, but good for them. It doesn't mean that you can copy. But I really like the Orbit design system, relatively recently launched, I guess maybe a year ago. Yeah, it's they have custom-made documentation website made in Gatsby, and it's really a lot of work they have done, and you really can explore how like the design system components work and so on. But I don't think this is something you can just copy and use at your own. And I would like to underline once again, this is custom-made thing. So even for the documentation, they didn't take any existing tool, but built everything on their own, because I guess they wanted something specific.
Nils, do you have any examples or recommendations? Nope.
No, not really. Sorry.
Yeah.
I guess there's like good GitHub site that collects all of those. So I guess it's about inspiration. Like you need to go and check those out, and then, as said, so they are different.
Yeah.
And I mean, not saying probably there are bad too, but I mean not bad, but I mean that I mean there is like something that you can steal from any system. I guess that would be beneficial. Of course, then understanding how the processes, for instance, work there behind the scenes. So usually you just see then some part of it, like the pattern library, I guess, or some visual things, which is of course, like as Varya was pointing in like it's just a kind of part of the iceberg that you can see. So then you miss a lot unless you then talk to people. Of course, then talking to people who build it and then working from there. So
yeah. We have a follow-up question to the one regarding the silos. The audience member asked, can you keep your own design system inside the silo if the effort to preach about the design system is a long time taking task?
And what's the point?
Well, I guess it's saying, yeah, what is the point if you have, then it's not a design system, it's a team's design.
I mean, of course, it depends, I guess, like if it's like for multiple teams or is it like just for your team. If it helps, I guess, like if it helps you, why not? I mean, it's a kind of way of thinking things and structure, I guess. So I mean that you can, of course, try from time to time selling it outside and then face resistance, and then you can go back home and then try it again at some point, or like try to work on your pitch. Of course, like of course, it can be tiring. I know from experience that kind of. That's why maybe consultants are hired to do that job.
Yes.
True.
All right. Well, that wraps up our panel. Thank you for joining me for this panel. Really appreciate everyone coming and giving us your time. Thank you, Nils, for joining us with your super cool home studio or office studio, wherever you are, and your shirt matches. Really nice. I will You're welcome. Sadly, we must now wrap up this edition of DevTalks and say goodnight to all you fab folks. Big thanks to all of our speakers. We had excellent talk and discussion. And if you want to get back to these talks, all the attendees will receive an email with links to the recordings in the next few days. And you can also check them out on our engineering blog on smartly.io. And we also have a YouTube channel. So the talks will be posted later on Smartly.io Engineering. And do check out as well our Twitter at smartly.io_devs. And last but not least, we appreciate your feedback. There's a QR that will come up on the screen after the jingle. Please take a moment to leave your feedback. Let us know if you enjoyed these talks and give us some feedback on what you'd like in the future. We will be having more of these Dev Talks. So thank you so much and see you next time at Smartly.io's Dev Talks.